Hello, so this is a review for Sorority Party Massacre, which is a 2012 film directed by Chris W. Freeman. This obviously is the DVD copy. I think it is also available on Blu-ray. Just quickly say before we get going that there are no extras to speak of on this DVD release other than just a chapter selection menu. Not sure about the Blu-ray, possibly that might have something more, I'm not sure. And in terms of actors, famous actors that might be in the film, there's only really one semi-famous one, who is Kevin Sorbo of Andromeda and Hercules, the legendary Journeys fame, but he's only got a relatively small role near the beginning. So that said, let's get into the story of this one, and it follows a big city detective by the name of William Watts, who due to anger management issues at work finds himself reassigned to the quiet and secluded Grizzly Cove. Whilst there, he is tasked with watching over his boss's daughter Holly, who is supposed to be visiting herself to participate in a local competition to crown the country's top sorority girl. Watts is troubled to learn, though, that no one seems to know anything about Holly, and it seems that she never even made it to the mansion where the competition is being held to join together with the other contestants. Things only get worse when telephone communication and travel to the outside world become cut off at around the same time of a suspicious death within the mansion grounds. It soon becomes clear that a killer is on the loose and targeting the remaining girls plus other Cove residents. Watts must then team up with a bungling local sheriff to try and keep everyone safe. So that's the story. We're now going to go into what I thought were the good points, and the main one is that things begin with a really strong opening segment, which for me was the highlight of the film. It's nothing too original, it's just a female that finds herself lost in kind of like Grizzly Cove woodland, and a car breaks down, and at that point she, in something that is quite reminiscent of Scream, she receives some threatening phone calls that turn out to be from a killer, who then attacks her, and she's basically at his mercy, trying to escape him in this woodland area. And though this is something that disappears later on in the film, at this point the killer is wearing quite a cool gas mask, so he looks good. And it also utilises quite a novel weapon, which is something that reminded me a little bit of something seen at the beginning of a different film, Cheerleader Camp to the Death, if you've seen that. Don't want to give too much away, but it was a nice weapon. But unfortunately the film struggles to maintain this early momentum, but the opening act does remain a standout moment. Okay, so the next positive thing is that without giving too much away regarding who the killer turns out to be, he wasn't exactly who I was expecting, so I was quite surprised. So this surprise did bring a satisfying enough payoff towards the end, so it kind of helped close out the film in a good way. And you could say that the film, as a result, is bookended by its two best moments, as in the start and the end. So at least it finishes with a flourish, you could say. There is some fun to be had with this is the next good point. There is some fun to be had with the two male lead characters, Detective William Watts and Sheriff Lumpkin. It does border on being a bit too silly at times for my liking, but they mostly strike the right note, and to some extent they do help hold things together. Okay, going on to the bad points now, things that I didn't like about the film. And the first one is that Watts and Lumpkin aside, I felt the film went too far with the tongue-in-cheek comedy angle, to the point of being really unrealistic and ridiculous almost. Examples would be the early introductory segments for the sorority girl contestants, which were really over the top and silly. And other films have gone down a similar route but done it better, so things like Girls Gone Dead or Spirit Camp, but here I don't really think it came off very well. The next bad point is that we don't really have a final girl character to speak of at all, really. There's no final girl, really. The detective William Watts kind of has to carry the load as like the main character almost entirely by himself, really, as a sort of a older than usual final boy of sorts. So there's no final girl, which is a bit of a disappointment. It's one of the vital ingredients, really, in a slasher. But here, in fact, none of the sorority girls were really very memorable. They were all pretty just instantly forgettable types that just came across as like cannon fodder, really. I couldn't really root for any one of them, to be honest. They were all very kind of like basic cookie cutter types with very little depth to them. Okay, the next bad point is that the first kill aside that I mentioned in that strong opening segment, all of the deaths from that point on are very disappointing, lacking in both gore or any kind of special or practical effects. Really disappointing, and most of the kills actually occur off camera, so you don't really even see what properly happens. And you can see here that it carries in the UK release here, that it carries a 15 certificate, sorry, so I guess that was the warning sign that it was going to be really gore-free, so to speak, and that did indeed prove to be the case, but it was even more lacklustre probably in that area than what I anticipated. So yeah, very disappointing in that regard. Also, like I mentioned before, the killer's appearance quickly goes downhill. Though he appeared to be quite cool looking in that opening segment, from that point on the mask is done away with and we don't get to see any kind of costume really. We just kind of see like his hands or his feet or whatever. We don't really get to see much of him, so he really kind of goes downhill in the appearance stakes as well. And the final bad point is that I thought the story at times was a bit threadbare and muddled, particularly in regards to what was supposed to have happened in the past at the mansion back in the time of the first sorority girl competition. Specifically, there was a specific scene where there were two girls talking about this, Jessie, Lynn and Brooklyn, which even after watching back several times I still couldn't really fully understand what they were talking about. It was really very muddled and hard to follow. It's not an integral part of the story, it's just kind of like a backstory really, so it's not that important, but it was something that I didn't think was very well presented. And similarly, the gimmick of the characters being done away with in relation to their greatest or worst fears is a neat idea on paper, but it's kind of poorly utilised here and they don't really use it as well as they could have done. And half the time it was just so underdeveloped that I didn't even really make the connection with how they died and their fears, so they could have done a lot better there, though it was a nice idea on paper, like I said, but just unfortunately not very well utilised. So my verdict then is that I was initially really keen to see it because I did see the trailer and thought it looked really good, and this feeling only intensified after I watched the strong opening segment, which was really impressive, but sadly they couldn't keep it going and things tapered off really quickly and it went downhill. The lack of any gore or memorable and backable female characters to want to root for are fatal flaws. It's also very silly at times, it's just too much for my liking and it just came across as being a bit ridiculous really. It does finish with a flourish, like I said, and it does pick up towards the end when they kind of start to reveal who the killer is, and that does add a nice little twist of sorts, but so it does end well at least, but it's the middle part that really falls flat, and the strong end is not enough to save it. So I'll probably give it a kind of a 4 or a 5 out of 10, kind of like a high 4, maybe a low 5 if I'm being generous. So it's not terrible, but it's by no means good, in my opinion. And one final thing to note is that there is a post-credit sequence that indicates a sequel, but which might have been supposed to have been called Bachelorette Party Massacre. But at time of recording this video, it's something like 7 years later since this film came out, so I'm guessing it's not going to happen now, but never came to fruition. But looks like they were planning a sequel at one point. Let's quickly show you the back before we finish here. Not a lot to it really. Like I said, there's no extras, so pretty bare bones disc. Alright, thanks for watching. Bye.